Good evening, black people and all allies fighting for black liberation, black prosperity, and black joy. I'm Charles Blow, and welcome to Prime. Voting is under assault. The black vote is under assault. And by extension, democracy itself is under assault. Protecting the vote must be the highest priority, higher than bipartisanship, higher than maintaining a filibuster, higher than passing an infrastructure bill. It doesn't matter if you fix a bridge if the right to vote has been abridged. Fighting to preserve voting rights and black and brown electoral participation should be the #1 priority of the Biden administration and of the president himself, but sadly it does not appear to be. Biden seems more concerned with blue collars and hard hats than the black vote in a tight squeeze. He wants to be the modern day FDR, launching a once-in-a-generation public works effort that reshapes American industry and the American workforce. But what black people need in this moment is a modern day Lincoln or LBJ, risking it all in a once-in-a-lifetime effort to grant rights and protections to black people. Now, that's not to say that Lincoln and LBJ were not white supremacists. They most certainly were. It's just that black people got something transformative out of the deal in both cases, and what they got was specifically aimed at them, not part of some rising tide lifts all boats nonsense. Joining me now to discuss is the host of Jemele Hill is Unbothered and contributing writer for The Atlantic, Jemele Hill, and president and senior lecturer of Repairers of the Breach and co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign, Bishop William Barber. Bishop Barber, to my mind, voting is the whole ball of wax. That's it. Without that, there is nothing. The other things on the agenda do not matter. How do you rank, or how do you contextualize what is happening around this voting issue, both what's happening in the states where they're rushing to restrict the vote and what's happening in the Senate where they are dragging their feet in protecting that vote?
You're exactly right. Without voting and full voting rights, you do not have a democracy. Not only something died for, it's the only way that we live in a democracy. And the truth of the matter, you can't get to living wages, you can't get to infrastructure, you can't get to health care without full participation of the vote, because when you suppress the vote, then you suppress people being able to get in office that will vote in a more progressive way. And what we're facing now, Charles, I came through a major voting rights fight in North Carolina in 2013 all the way to 2017. Took us 4 years because the Voting Rights Act had been gutted and pre-clearance had been removed. Took us 4 years to beat a bill that was called Racism with Surgical Intent. And the design of that bill was not merely to block us from having rights, it was to take away rights. And that's what we see now. These bills are trying to take away provisions, take away access that has been won over the years. It's a theme called retrogression. And why is there retrogression? Because right now, you heard me say on your show a few weeks ago, in 15 states, if just 1 to 24% of poor and low wealth voters were to organize and vote, they can change who sits in the Senate, who sits in the presidency, who sits in governor's houses, and who makes it. And black people, 60.9% of black people are poor and low wealth. So what we see is an all-out assault on public policy. I like to connect it, though, Charles. I say that when you attack voting, you're attacking my living wages. And Manchin, interestingly enough, the first vote that should have scared us is when he blocked living wages. Because when he blocked 15 in the union, he blocked 40% of poor and low wealth black folk rising up out of poverty. Now he's going after the vote. And I'm going to West Virginia because black folk and mountain white folk have called for us to march on him in West Virginia because they see what he's doing is an assault on them and an assault on any possibility of progress in this country. And it's got to be #1. I mean, we're talking about over 300 bills. And lastly, even if you pass the Voting Rights Act, why you have to have both Voting Rights Act and For the People, is because you can't grandfather pre-clearance. And all of these bills that are passed, if they get passed, the only way to undo their damage is to have the For the People Act. So what Manchin is doing is wrong. It undergirds racism, it undergirds classism, and it destroys democracy. And we better stand up and fight like we've never fought before in recent days.
Jemele, when they restrict the vote, they're not just restricting the vote that would be cast in a presidential election. That cascades all the way down. That is, you're no longer able to vote for your governor. You're no longer able to go vote if judges in your state are on the ballot. You're no longer able to vote for your local DA. You're no longer able to vote for who's on your city council or on your school board. The idea of that these laws are being proposed and in some cases passed across the country, some people have called Jim Crow 2.0. How do you see it that way, or how do you see it?
I see it as essentially that serious. And I think what is really alarming, what is insulting, what is disrespectful to Black voters is over the last couple of years, we saw the Democratic Party, essentially, they realized that they could not go any further without us. They got us all to rally. They got us all to cut turnout in record numbers. We did so under the guise, it wasn't just about the party. Black people did so under the guise of saving this country from itself. And the last thing that we want to hear right now is that this white man in West Virginia who is doing everything to undercut what this country should stand for, that he stands in the way. At some point, that well is going to run dry. We're going to get tired to show up, tired of showing up for this fight, only for Democrats to get to this point and just lose everything under this false sense of bipartisanship. What should alarm everybody about these bills that are sweeping the country, they're built on a lie. They would not be here if not for Republicans continuing to push this notion that we don't have a legitimate president right now. They salty, they mad that they lost the election and that they lost the Senate, and this is their retaliation and retribution. Now, they've been playing this long game for a minute. Reverend Barber, of course, the bishop, he alluded to what they fought for in North Carolina, which is one of the most egregious acts of undercutting democracy that I've ever seen. But now that fight has to continue. And frankly, we need Joe Biden and whoever else to have some backbone because we're tired of having to save them from themselves. They need to help save this country because we have put our work in.
Exactly.
William Barber, Bishop Barber, how do we move forward here? They keep talking to Joe Manchin. Joe Manchin has made very clear that his position on this is a mess, right? So it's, I want bipartisanship, which it basically means I want you Democrats to find a way to appeal to Republican senators to vote for something. They have said they have no interest whatsoever in helping you out to achieve anything. There is no bipartisanship to be had on this bill.
And think
so
about
what is this pageantry all about? Why are we week after week after week pretending that there is movement or there is a potential for movement on this particular this bill when everybody on the Republican side has basically said we're not playing ball at all, and Manchin is saying there will be no ball played unless they play ball.
Yeah, he acted like we elected Joe Manchin president, not Joe Biden. But even beyond that, isn't it interesting that Joe Manchin is opposite everything Vice President Kamala Harris would be for, and that she would have the deciding vote? I'm wanting to factor that in. There's something in that he was against living wages, and if it had gone on the floor, Vice President Harris would have had the vote, and she would have been the darling of working people. Now voting rights, he's against that. So is this also the white boy club that doesn't want to position her for potentially running for president? That's a whole nother conversation. But more importantly is Biden, first of all, I mean, Manchin is lying. History is just a lie. 1866 Civil Rights Bill, 14th Amendment, 15th Amendment, 1870 Enforcement Act, the Ku Klux Klan Act, the 1872 Enforcement Act, the 1875 Civil Rights Act, 1875 Enforcement Act were all partisan bills. They would not have happened under this notion of bipartisanship. The filibuster was used to try to block women's suffrage, to try to block the New Deal, to block every piece of civil rights legislation. So his whole bearing that the filibuster brings people together is a lie. Secondly, when he came out of the meeting today with some civil rights leaders, he said it was constructive and respectful, and he learned something. What do you have to learn? The Voting Rights Act has been gutted for 8 years. We've got over 300 voter suppression. For him as a senator to insult us again by saying he had to learn something and he would like to keep talking, but he's not going to move, the clock will run out. There has to be street pressure, but it has to be black and white and brown. And that's why we're going to West Virginia and we're mobilizing black people and white people and veterans, because he fears veterans and he fears the miners. And I don't know if you saw, but just today, the miners, I talked to them, the United Mine Workers, they came out in support of the Voting Rights Act and the poor people. That's the coalition we've got to build and put heat on him. But also, lastly, politicians know how to put politicians heat on them in the party. And if the party can't put heat on him for this one, then what's the point? Really, really. If you're going to let him just undermine everything, my sister's exactly right. Not one of them said, Banton, when he was running, didn't say, if you elect me, I'm going to block the Voting Rights Act. If you elect me, I'm going to stop the For the People's Act. If you elect me, he didn't say, he wouldn't have dared say that while he was running. He wouldn't have dared say that. He's only saying it after the election. And you're right, folk are getting tired of that. You run on one thing, but then when you get power, you don't use it. Now, Republicans, one thing you got to give them, when they get power, they use it. You at least got to give them that. You might not like what they use it for, but when they tell you what they're going to do, and then they do it, even if it's wrong, racist, and backwards, they do it. And Democrats better stand up on this one, because I'm telling you, not just the next election, but we're on a precipice in this democracy right now. And one person from West Virginia cannot have the final say. That's why we're going there on the 14th, and that's why people are going to get on buses from West Virginia and Kentucky and march in Washington, D.C. on the 23rd. Of this month as well. We cannot be silent or quiet.
Jemele, what effect do you think this all is going to have on black voters and their enthusiasm, their willingness to participate, their willingness to get out to the polls, if they see Democrats not fighting tooth and nail for their right to vote? If they see Democrats not fighting tooth and nail for the George Floyd Policing Accountability Act, if they see, the Democrats in Congress, not all of them clearly, the Democrats in Congress basically saying, please play ball with us, begging, pleading, but not getting them results, or even if you don't get the results, not going down fighting.
I fear it's going to have a really damning effect. You all being commentators, being close to what was happening in the streets and on the ground, you already know how hard it was to get some of our people to vote in this election. A lot of them were disillusioned. They were disgruntled. They had no faith in the system, understandably so, considering how the system has treated us historically and presently. And so now you're going to tell them, okay, get them all hyped up and say, you came out to vote, you have this power, but then it comes down to, once again, just the newer version of Mitch McConnell. Then why should they have any faith or trust or hope in you ever again? You've proven them to be liars, essentially. You've proven that you're a liar and that you don't intend on sticking up for the very people that got you there. Because here's the thing, we all know that we didn't vote for Joe Biden because we have some sense of, because we like Joe Biden, because we want to have dinner with Joe Biden, because we want to have a beer with Joe Biden. We voted for Joe Biden because we expected something in return. There were demands that were made. And many of us made it clear then, if these demands were not met, then you were going to lose some of us forever. And I feel like we're on the precipice of that right now. And I think a lot of us have grown tired of these bipartisan, lukewarm efforts that are really just about upholding white supremacy. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said it best when he called out the white moderate. It's a whole bunch of white moderates out here undercutting the process. And Joe Manchin is leading that group. But anybody who co-signs what he's done, who will not call him out for it, who won't apply pressure, they're just as bad as he is. So they have a big job to do on their hands, and they have to find some way, as the bishop said, to apply pressure within the party, because people are just not going to stand for this and say, we're tired of having decisions made, colossal decisions that could affect hundreds of millions, come down to somebody whose state, who has a base that is not representative of where this country is going.
And Charles, may I?
Jemele Hill and Bishop Barber,
Can I make
thank you so much for
a-
joining me tonight. I really appreciate your time.